Chapter 5. Escape from Alcatraz. For some desperate prisoners, no price was too high to pay for the sweet taste of freedom. Over the course of many months in 1946, Bernie Coy, inmate number 415, came up with an escape plan that became known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Coy worked in the library. He could move around the cell house and talk quietly with other inmates while he delivered books. Coy watched the guards carefully, learning their habits. At Alcatraz, there were strict rules for the guards as well as the prisoners. For example, if a guard needed the key to go to the yard, he would tap on the door. Then a guard on the west gun gallery, a walkway that overlooked the cell house, lowered a key to the first guard. On the afternoon of May 2nd, Bernie Coy and his partners took advantage of this routine. The cell house was mostly empty after lunch. Coy quietly swept the corridors. He tapped on the door to D block. This was the signal for his partner, Crazy Sam Shockley, to start screaming. Crazy Sam raised a big ruckus. The officers patrolling the cell house went to D block to see what was going on. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, inmate Marv Hubbard asked to be excused. He was finished with his work and said he wanted to go to the yard for some fresh air. Permission was granted, and Hubbard left the kitchen. Hubbard stood outside the door so Officer Bill Miller could search him. At this point, Bernie Coy put down his broom and snuck up behind Officer Miller. Coy pinned Miller's arms behind his back, then Hubbard punched the officer, knocking him out cold. Coy took the officer's keys and opened a cell door. He had been watching for months to learn which keys opened which doors. Coy and Hubbard took Officer Miller's pants and jacket, bound and gagged him, put him in the cell, and locked him inside. Then, using Miller's keys, Coy started opening cell doors for his other friends. Next, Coy grabbed a small tool bag he had hidden. In it was a bar spreading tool made from toilet fixtures. With the bag in his mouth, Coy climbed up to the gun gallery. He took out his tool and got to work, spreading apart the bars that protected the gun gallery. Coy squeezed through the tiny opening. He'd been dieting for months to be sure he'd fit through. He found a club and crouched down to hide. He gave the signal to Joseph Kretzer, one of the men he'd just freed. Kretzer tapped on the yard door, signaling the officer up in the gun gallery to come out and lower the key to him. The officer had no idea what had been happening. When he appeared, Coy hit him with the club, knocking him unconscious. Coy quickly found a key ring and a pistol and gave them to Kretzer. He found a rifle and took it for himself. For the next several minutes, the men tried to find the right key, number 107, to open the door to the yard. But it wasn't there. They tried all the keys. None of them worked. Little did Coy know that Officer Miller had broken the rules earlier that day. Rather than return key number 107 to the gun gallery that morning like he was supposed to, he had put it in his shirt pocket. More guards and prisoners stumbled onto the scene. They were taken hostage. Coy and his men were running out of time. They demanded to know where key number 107 was. Miller lied and said it must be in the gun gallery where it belonged. By then, Miller had hidden the key in the cell. A guard from the basement came upstairs and realized what was happening in the cell house. He ran back downstairs and called Warden Johnston. The alarm was sounded. Coy grabbed his rifle. He knocked out some windows and took aim, shooting at the guards in 3 watchtowers. Kretzer took his pistol and opened fire on the officers they had taken hostage. He wanted to leave no witnesses. But while Kretzer wasn't looking, one of the officers wrote on the ground the names of the 6 prisoners who were trying to escape. Then he circled the names of the leaders, Coy, Hubbard, and Kretzer. Officers called inside the cell house. They wanted to discuss a way to end the violence. Kretzer screamed back that he'd never be taken alive. For 3 days, the Battle of Alcatraz raged on. Gunfire was exchanged. More guards were flown in from federal prisons in Washington state and Kansas. They threw tear gas canisters into the cell house. They fired machine guns and mortars. Marines were called in to guard the prisoners who were still in the yard, locked outside the cell house. Coast Guard boats circled the island. Eventually, a hole was drilled into the cell house ceiling, and grenades and explosives were dropped through. The blasts could be heard across the bay in San Francisco, where people watched through binoculars as the battle raged. At the end of the Battle of Alcatraz, Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard were found dead. Crazy Sam Shockley and another partner in crime were put on trial and convicted. They were executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison, seated next to each other. The sixth man received an additional 99-year sentence. Officer Miller died from his injuries. Remarkably, the other hostages survived, but another guard, Harold Stites, was killed in the battle. The Battle of Alcatraz was not the first escape attempt in Alcatraz, and it wouldn't be the last. In its 29 years as a federal prison, Alcatraz saw 14 escape attempts. No one escaped alive, but not everyone believes that. Perhaps the most famous attempt was the 13th in June 1962. Frank Lee Morris, a genius and an escape artist, planned an escape with 3 partners, Alan Clayton West, and brothers John and Clarence Angland. Over many months, every night the men chipped away at the wall surrounding their ventilator grills. They used spoons stolen from the mess hall. They wanted to reach a corridor on the other side. Out of view from the guards, this corridor ran between the 2 rows of cells in the block. Bit by bit, the wall around the ventilator grills crumbled. The rocks and dust were flushed down the toilet or scattered the next day when they went to work. While 2 men dug, the others acted as lookouts. To cover the holes they were digging, they made a look-alike grill out of cardboard. They painted the grill to match the real thing perfectly. Part 2 of the plan involved more arts and crafts. Using soap, cotton rags, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the barber shop, they built papier-mâché heads, then painted them. These heads would be placed on their beds the night of the escape to fool the guard who made the nighttime counts. Finally, they needed a way off the island. Frank Morris got an idea from Popular Mechanics magazine. He would create a raft and life vests out of raincoats. After lights out on June 11th, Morris and the Angland brothers put their dummy heads to bed, then squeezed out of their cells into the corridor. Alan West couldn't remove the grill from his cell wall in time. It was stuck. He was left behind. Morris and the Anglands climbed up to the roof of the building. Avoiding the spotlights from the watchtowers, they climbed down a 50-foot shaft to the ground and ran toward the water. After scaling a barbed wire fence, they finally reached the waters of San Francisco Bay. They inflated their raft, then got in the water and started paddling to shore. The next morning, a guard tried to wake up Frank Morris. When he nudged Morris's head, it rolled onto the floor. That must have been a surprise. Alcatraz went on lockdown right away. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, arrived with bloodhounds. They followed the inmates' trail to the water. State and local police joined the Coast Guard in the biggest manhunt in San Francisco history. Pieces of the raft and life vests were found scattered across the Bay Area. But no suspicious crimes, no robberies, no stolen cars were reported nearby. The men seemed to have vanished into thin air. The FBI closed the case in 1979. Frank Morris and the Anglands were declared dead, drowned in the churning waters of San Francisco Bay. But no bodies have ever been found.